Awesome. So for those of you who don't know me, which is actually most of you, I guess, I'm Mahesh. I guess I should have put my name up on the thing. Mahesh Paulini Subramania. I'm the CTO of a company called Vocalocity, which is a big shocker here, a telecom. Erlang Telecom, haha, very funny. Seriously, we are basically a hosted phone. We provided hosted phone services for small businesses, think Vonage for small businesses, and we are essentially a really large-scale, distributed, concurrent, massively parallel, scalable, blah, 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 platform that happens to do phone services on the side. That's probably the easy way to think about it. Till about 6 years ago, this all started back in 98, 99. Till about 6 years ago, we were doing everything in Java, and basically we got to the point where there's absolutely no way that we could do any kind of development because we're spending all the time just maintaining this huge parallel, horizontally scalable thingy that wasn't really huge or parallel or horizontally scalable or anything. So about 2005, 2006, we started, we being me, basically said, screw it, we're just gonna cut bait, I guess. And we just rewrote everything in Erlang from scratch. Why Erlang? I wish I had a great reason for that. I don't. It was some long, massive chain of coincidences that ended up being Erlang. And now pretty much our entire code base is in Erlang, and life is good, and we're happy, and you know, there's tea and crumpets for everyone, and it's great. And the best part is that's got nothing to do with what this talk is about. Trust me, telecom, you never want to hear anything about anybody talk about telecom, ever. You don't want to be in telecom. I am, and that's one person too many. So, let's see, we are, how do I get this going? I have no, there we go. Something's happening. So, what I did on my vacation, and the question is, what did I do on my vacation? I love diving. My wife and I love diving. It's kind of our thing. We go about once every other month. We go all over the place. The place we particularly like to go is Curacao, which is just north of Venezuela. And we'd been about 3 months ago, and it was gorgeous. It was awesome, as always. And we bought tickets to go right back because we couldn't wait till next month to go. And it's only about a day before we left that I realized that Spawnfest happened to be right during the dive vacation. In fact, it was the last 2 days of the long weekend that we're there. We're there for 4 days. 2 of those days were going to be Spawnfest. So my options were, you know, don't dive or don't do Spawnfest. And I decided, you know, I'd go with option C, which is do both at the same time. And that's where we're going with all of this. So for those of you that don't know what Spawnfest is, basically what you're talking about is you got 48 hours to write something, whatever the hell that thing is. It's got something to do with Erlang. There's a whole bunch of random legal crap, or whatever that the people made up. Think hackathon, 48 hours, code. We came up with what, 3 of us, we decided we'd build something we called Early Mob. We wanted to call it InstaMob, we wanted to call it Flash Mob, but the whole point is it is going to be a tool that you could use to set up flash mobs, whatever that is, whatever kind of flash mob you want it to be. So the idea is you're sitting there, you got a great idea, want to set up a flash mob, you do it. Or you can use it for activism, you can do it for quick notice meetups, you can do it for event management, things along those lines. Whatever. You know, remember, all stupid implementations start with a great idea. This was one of those. So how does this actually work? You're sitting there, you're watching Thriller. Don't ask me why. YouTube. You got tired of cat videos, you're watching the Thriller thingy, and you go, wow, you know what we should do? We should have a flash mob. We're going to do the Thriller dance. So you send out a note. It's a quick tweet. You just send a tweet out saying, hey, how about we all do the Thriller a monster dance, and you send out the Google Maps link to the place that you're going to have your flash mob at. You send it to us, of course. We pick it up transparently. We promptly send back a hashtag to you saying, hey, you are now mob number whatever the hell you are. Everybody else who's within some minimum safe distance of that Google Maps link also gets that note saying, hey, there's going to be a thriller monster dance today at 6:30 p.m. Everybody who's there. So if you happen to be in the middle of Manhattan, that's great. Anybody in Manhattan gets it. If you happen to be in Peoria, then all 6 people who got that application running in Peoria happen to get it too, but let's hope you're in Manhattan. So of all the people that get it, somebody says, I like it. They click on the like thingy and that's it. Somebody else says, I ignore it, which basically is they click on the ignore link and they don't get any more notifications about that particular one. And the last person says, oh yeah, I'll do it. Maybe 50 people say I'll do it. The moment they say I'll do it, a bunch of other fun stuff starts happening. They get the coordinator, me, the one that sent out the flash mob thingy, and these 50 people can start talking to each other, coordinate, organize, yeah, show up there, wear your costume, wear zombie face paint. Do you actually know what the dance is? Things along those lines. Get all the stuff together. As you get closer to 6:30 p.m., get a little map on your screen saying, this is how you get there. Take the 1 train to St. Paul's and blah, blah, blah. And once you actually show up at the thing, it knows because it's all geotagged and nice and happy. You get a little camera thingy on the screen. You can tweet, you can take videos, you can do whatever. It uploads it to YouTube. All the fun, happy stuff to actually make an app look good. And you get there and hey, what do you know? Everybody's flash mobbing, life is good, this is great. So that's the idea, that's what we're planning on doing. Remember I said there were 3 of us? The project was called Early Mob. We needed a team name, so we went with Team NetSplit. And the reason is there's the GUI guy who was in Atlanta, that is good. There was me in Curacao, which was not good from some perspectives, but good from another. And there's my buddy who's done in Buenos Aires. And the 3 of us were going to work together on this project over 48 hours, and joy, Team NetSplit. Of course, the really beautiful thing was by the way, this stuff starts, let's see, Friday evening at 8 p.m. and it starts Sunday evening at 8 p.m. It's midnight GMT, effectively, for us. So come about Friday afternoon, all of a sudden, we're doing final coordination. We have this momentary, well, not so momentary shock and horror. Thing one was, who the hell scheduled dinner for Saturday evening? Which it turned out Juan Jose had people who he was supposed to take out for dinner, and he couldn't avoid this. It's this friends of ours who had just gotten married, and this is kind of like their taking to the best restaurant in Buenos Aires, blah, 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 which was not exactly what he had been looking forward to. Then, as it turns out, I get this sudden phone call from American Airlines Friday afternoon. Never a good sign when the airline calls you, ever. And they said, hey, guess what? We're not having that flight on Monday that you're supposed to take back. You're leaving on Sunday at noon, which means I basically missed the last 8 hours of Spawnfest, which Tom was not exactly too happy, because this is basically us going, this is your problem, dude. And there, of course, was me, which, I actually happen to like diving, and this is not exactly what I was looking forward to doing. Erlang is fun, Erlang is great, but diving is even more fun. And then, of course, I went with my wife, who, let me just tell you, was pretty damn happy all the time. She was just sitting there going, cool, you go do whatever you want. I'm sitting on the beach, I'm happy, life is great. I wish I could say that's true. That's not really true. It is more along the lines of, dude, what the fuck? You're supposed to be, here. So, we had all our plans. We had all our neat stuff. We've been doing this Erlang thing for a long time, and yeah, we still don't know what the hell we're doing. It's just one of those things. We had these great plans. We're going to build this stuff. It's going to be great. There's all this neat thing. This is what it's going to look like. And you don't need to worry about what it does. Let's just assume, just for basic purposes, you got users and you've got tweets, posts, and there are trees that keep track of where the posts show up and locations, because you got to do geographical funness, and we're using quad trees and R trees to keep track of where people are. There's amnesia, there's big CouchDB with geotagging on the back end to persist stuff. There's all this stuff. We knew we could get all this done in 48 hours. Okay, we didn't. We kind of assumed we wouldn't get to some of this stuff. We kind of got rid of the CouchDB stuff right off the top. And actually what we ended up was that, which was basically none of the geotagging stuff. Basically, it's like if you send a flash mob request out, everybody gets it, and which is great. And any response, oh come on, everybody's in Manhattan, and the rest of the world doesn't count. So that is basically that. So yeah, we dropped the R trees. This was actually one of the very first things to get dropped, because the really beautiful thing about R trees is they're a righteous pain in the ass to work with. And if you start going any further with them, everybody know what R trees are? Anybody know what R trees are? Some of you know what they are. R trees, just think storing geotaggable data, so you can do searches on polygons instead of searches on key values. That's an understandable lie. Just live with that. Notifications. Yeah, well, so what happened was, all that fun back and forth that the coordinator and the people would have, screw that, you don't need to do that. You know where the flash mob is, just show up there, have a nice day. All the fun auto-updating with the GUI and so on and so forth. And there's a reason why all this got dropped, and I'll get to that in a moment, in a bit. And of course, the CouchDB fun stuff on the back end so that we could store all the geotagged information. I remember somebody who will go nameless, but who happens to live in Buenos Aires, said something about wanting to use MongoDB because they've got all the geospatial indexing that you need, and it works just fine. Pablo kind of alluded to this earlier, but a lot of you use MongoDB, right? I didn't see a show of hands. How many? A lot of you? 2, 3, 4, 5, wow, 6, 7, 8. Wow. Holy shnikes. Okay, so editorial moment here. MongoDB is a wonderful database written by people who have never had anything to do with databases in their lives. Yeah. The wonderful thing, a lesson that it took me forever to figure out is, in the end, perception is reality. So let's see, if you want to design a database system that's a NoSQL database, which is going to be used by everybody, how do you do it? Rule 1, go hire a bunch of great GUI people. Rule 2, get some great documentation. Rule 3, get some college interns to write the database engine. It works. It's brilliant. It works like a charm. Tangent's taken over the world. The database doesn't work for shit, but who cares? It's Mongo. It's great. And editorial moment. Yes?
So how did you get there? So if you're going to use Mongo, how would you, because it only supports MBR, right?
Yeah, ergo, we dropped it. Yeah. I was just like, screw this. So we had a couple of choices that we could have used for this. But part of the deal behind the way we're building all of this, we wanted to do this the right way, as in actually scalable, self-contained nodes, et cetera, and not have everything funneling through one MySQL instance or one Postgres instance. So we said the backend's got to be some kind of horizontally scalable, NoSQL-y thing, Mongo, and forget it, just pretend. So React or doesn't do spatial queries. Couch does, so we went with Couch. Or we didn't go with Couch, to be precise. Bunch of funny things happened along the way, by the way. The flash mob thingy kind of ended up as a, actually, to take a step back, the flash mob thingy is actually doing pretty well, and we're demoing it to a bunch of people on Wednesday, which is why I don't have a real live demo right now. It's being redone as we speak. But absolutely apropos nothing else, we ended up building something called App Cache, completely serendipitously for this hackathon. And we're now ripping out vast swaths of our production code base and replacing it with this stuff, which is, hey, you know, life is good. So let me take a brief detour on what App Cache is. It's basically amnesia-based persistence and caching. And the idea here is amnesia is a wonderful, spectacular, ridiculously cool thing, which if you know how to use it, it's ridiculously trivial, and you just go ahead and use it. But then, you know, if you haven't used it in a couple of months, you just got to go back and read the documentation all over again because it's insanity. Ulf and the rest of the crowd are brilliant, and they didn't put their brilliance in documentation. So anyhow, that's a separate story. So what we basically built was, I ripped it out of something that Juan Ho, who's the Buenos Aires guy, had put together for some other project. And it's essentially a templating engine that you use to set up your amnesia tables, and you plug it in, it just automatically builds your amnesia tables wherever it needs to be. You've got data accessors, you've got all sorts of other fun stuff. It just kind of works in the background, and in the foreground, you're just using some basic stuff. So the core idea is you set up a bunch of records which basically define what your amnesia table needs to be like. You got a table name, you got a time to live, which is here 3,600 seconds, or you could use the atom infinity, in which case it's not a cache. If it's a cache, you're giving it a certain amount of time. In the background, you'll just time the data out and remove it from the database, from amnesia. You set up the type, set, ordered, set, or bag, which if you know what amnesia is, it all makes sense. You tell it what the fields are that the thing is supposed to have, and you tell it what fields you want any secondary indexes on. And lastly, those last four things, the read transform function, write, refresh, and persist. So here's basically the way that it works. Every time you write something into, this is just a cache in the background, remember. So every time you write some data to the cache, you can say, the data I'm writing, transform it, do something to it before you set it in the system. Stupid example, out here, you've got ID, timestamp, pretty name, and destination. So the transform is, every time I write the dest, go do a Google lookup, get the actual Google ID for that destination and replace it in there. So you don't need to write that in the front end. You just write that accessor one, it takes care of it. Read transform does the exact same thing in the opposite direction. You read the data from the system, it finds the Google ID, goes to Google, gets the actual lat long for that, and gives you the lat long. Refresh function. The idea behind refresh function is there's some data in the cache that stales out, but you want that data to be relatively current. So you give it a refresh function and you say, hey, you know what, here's a record for a product. I've got it, it's just a pointer to something in Amazon. I got a bunch of the parameters there, what the latest price is for the product. The refresh function just says, oh, once every 8 hours, just go to Amazon and get the latest price and jam it back in there. So it's just doing that in the background. You don't care about it. Persist function is, think of that as the classic caching. I write the data into the database, it automatically into amnesia. The persist function is every time I do a write, what do you do with it? Either synchronously or asynchronously flush it into some secondary store. Couch, Mongo, React, whatever the hell you want it to be. The point behind all of this, of course, is you don't need to keep rewriting all of this over and over again for your own purposes. So how you initialize the thing, you basically give it that table info record that I told you, and you call the request, and it just builds out all the stuff in the backend on one node or on all the nodes that you so care about. You got a bunch of standard accessors. Your default data accessors. Give me the data by last key, by first key. Give me the data by timestamp. Give me all the data that's shown up after a given timestamp. Give me the data based on some index field. The kind of standard stuff that you do with standard database queries, but working on amnesia. It's got sequences, which turn out to be really useful. Just build a sequence and just keep giving me successive ones. Don't show it here. It's also got cached sequences. Cached sequences are, give me a sequence, it gives me 100 numbers at one shot. When I'm done with the 100, it gives me the next 100 and so on. And it can intermingle cached sequences with normal sequences. So you can have somebody accessing the normal ones on the back end. The transforms that I already described, and that's where the stuff came from. We actually built a huge chunk of this as part of Spawnfest because it was just such a righteous pain in the ass to be doing all the amnesia caching on the front end. We're improving it a lot. The version right now is somewhat unrecognizable from the version that got created as part of Spawnfest. To James' point earlier, the documentation is crap. Actually, no, that's a lie. There is no documentation. So that's much simpler. The whole flash mob thingy works off of Twitter, of course. So the nice thing about Twitter is they've got this complete REST-based API. And at this point, there's only one really good Twitter, Erlang Twitter implementation, and it's not very good at all. I mean, it's a pure REST-based thingy, and it basically sucks. Actually, it doesn't suck. It's really good, except it's not good. So we rewrote that. And this is just a chunk that we cared about. It's got all the standard basic Twitter API stuff in Erlang, so it's still a sucky interface. It's a Twitter sucky part. It's a Twitter suckiness. It's not Erlang Twitter suckiness. And it does two very, very, very important things from our perspective. There might be more than two. I can't see the rest of the slides here. But the two ones that I could think of are, it's got the streaming stuff built in. The existing stuff that Nick wrote is a REST-based API. We threw in the streaming API for this, so you can get your stuff streamed to you. Life is good. It does everything in Erlang world. So this is not throwing JSON or XML back at you, for good or for bad. Good for us, bad if you like JSON. The last part for us, which we thought, okay, so the third thing that it does, which we kind of like, the data that you get back from the Twitter API either gets sent to a process, to you, or to a function. You basically define where you want the results to go, and it ends up going there, and you can then process it, muck with it, so on and so forth. Again, remember the bit about us being a telecom, which also is a bit of a lie because it's not really a telecom. We're a communication services company. So the services we provide integrate a whole bunch of stuff, your Twitter feeds, all your asynchronous communication protocol media, Twitter, SMS, IM, along with the synchronous stuff, video and voice. So this is what we're throwing in for all of the asynchronous stuff that we do as part of our communications. So this is the, Nick Gerakinis is the guy who wrote the Erlang Twitter original one, and that's where we got our stuff from. So that's the serendipitous stuff that came out of it that was good, that works, and we're all happy about that. So probably what's worth going into is what actually happened as part of the Spawnfest thingy, which is where the Twitter and the app cache and the flash mob stuff actually got written. Which of course begins really, really, really simply, with Tom Heinen, who is the Atlanta GUI guy, kicking things off with an official Instagram picture. And I think that may be one of only 2 Instagram pictures we had the whole time. because pretty shortly, some of us, and when I say some, I mean the folks in Atlanta and Buenos Aires, stopped taking pictures, which is not good. This is an absolutely irrelevant shot. But looking out of the window of our hotel room, there was what is clearly the world's biggest ship suddenly showed up right outside the hotel. That thing is a ship which is a floating oil rig. It's actually a ship which is an oil rig. It costs $700 million. It's about 800 feet by 200 feet, length by width. And there's a bunch more stuff about it, but it was just huge. I had to take a picture of it. This is next morning. Seriously. Clearly, I was really hard at work, just so you know. And this was so the way, when you go diving, the way it works is you dive for about an hour, if you're shallow. You come up, you spend an hour on the surface, and then you go diving for another hour, which is kind of neat. And at the end of the hour is basically when you start actually doing stuff. After which, you go back in the water. So there's a unfortunate side effect to diving. When you're diving, it doesn't feel like you're doing a lot. Because you're under the water, you're kind of floating, there are little fishies, it's all pretty, it's nice. Okay, there's some big fishies, but that's a separate issue. But, and those are my lovely wife's fins, by the way. But that's the left fin. Yeah. There's also a right fin, but it's kind of messy. The problem is when you're under the water, you're breathing out air under pressure, and your diaphragm is doing a lot of the pushing air in and out kind of a thing. It's effing exhausting, let me tell you. You don't realize it till you get out of the water, and you don't go to sleep because you're coding. And then usually the way our dive vacations go is 3 or 4 dives during the day. You have about 2 beers. Sorry, 2. That's it. And about 7:30, you're looking at your wife and you're going, screw dinner, let's go to bed. And that's it, 7:30 p.m. That's why that's midnight. And that completely dazed and baffled look on my face is me going down for my 11th cup of coffee and realizing that the coffee machine at the espresso bar in the hotel is broken, which was not a pretty shot. I'd also like to point out that exactly 2 hours later, Juan Jose was stumbling out of the restaurant that he was having dinner at with our friends. So not a very promising start, I must point out. But Q, the next morning, it's slightly better, life is getting slightly better. That's my wife on the beach looking around going, why are we here at 6:30 in the morning? And I don't really have an answer for that. The only reason was if I was going to be in the hotel room, I was going to fall asleep. So I figured if I went out to the beach with the sun and stuff, I might stay awake, which turned out was accurate for a totally separate reason. 10 hours to go. Yeah, not much happiness going on. And then this is me with 6 hours to go. That's basically me running through the airport, trying to get to a Wi-Fi hotspot for 30 minutes before the plane takes off. And the answer was I didn't. That's with 50 minutes to go. So this is where life gets really interesting because we've gotten to this point, there's about 50 minutes to go, and Mahesh is obviously totally missing in action. It's basically Juan Jose, the guy down in Argentina, who is, by the way, one of those Creston-like Erlang genii who I kind of bow down to thrice every morning before doing anything, and who found a problem with something I'd written and he can't fix it. And they're trying to get hold of me, but I'm not accessible. And when Juan Jose has a problem that he can't fix and he wants me to fix it and I'm not accessible, that's just badness all around, as you can imagine. It's like, why would he even assume that I can fix something I wrote? I don't know. But especially if he can't. But by the way, just to cut to the chase, I didn't get online in time. But he managed to find the problem, which was it's kind of brilliant on my part. Somewhere along the way, I think it was at about this juncture where I did find the hotspot, and I made that one, you know the story, the one last check-in before you get on the plane. Genius, sheer genius, where not only was it the last check-in, it's a check-in where I swapped out all the string handling libraries that we had built in. Because I said, you know what, it should be consistent so you can find all the problems in exactly one place. And as it turned out, yes, all the problems were in exactly one place. It was that code that I just checked in, which was gorgeous. So it turns out that the Twitter library that I'd so lovingly crafted, which did all the fun streaming stuff, whatever, expect strings as inputs, and all the code I checked in took binaries as inputs, and a bit more, but strings are not binaries. It's a bit of a problem. Juan Jose, to his credit, basically, again, he hasn't slept for like 2 days at this point, as have none of us, but he kind of got smart about it and said, okay, it's not working. It was working earlier today. Mahesh obviously screwed it up. Let me just back out whatever he checked in one by one. So the very first thing he backed out of, all of a sudden everything started working. And it was great. So with exactly 1 minute to go, and I do mean 1 minute to go, we got that thing up and running, which was pretty awesome. So that's kind of like the quick timeline of how it got working. More interesting though, from my perspective, and maybe for anybody, 2, 3 people here who are vaguely newish to the world of Erlang. 2 of us are fairly old hands at Erlang, or Erlang-like thingies, and some of us, me, have been doing this for uncountable years. One of us, Tom Heinen, the guy who took that first and last Instagram picture, his introduction to Erlang was this. He's basically a Ruby guy. He's doing all the GUI stuff in a Bootstrap, Twitter Bootstrap. But somewhere along the way, he and Juanjo, while I was in a dive somewhere, decided that, you know what, let's really go with the spirit of Spawnfest. We'll do all the GUI handling stuff in Erlang. We'll use Chicago Boss, which, you know, it's a great, great, great project. They're doing good work there, God's work, or whatever the hell it is. But holy shit, man. I mean, it's complex stuff. And if you don't know anything about these kind of frameworks, you're dead. If you do know anything about these frameworks and you don't know Erlang, you're just about as dead. You just are. It's incredibly complicated and complex stuff, and we only figured it out ex post facto. So, by the way, this, just as a second point here, I'm not even talking about OAuth 2.0, which is a whole new level of the suck. OAuth per se sucks. When you're trying to wire up an OAuth implementation using Bootstrap and Chicago Boss, which you're having issues with anyhow, it took Tom and Juanjo 6 hours to just get authentication done. That's a really large amount of time. Of course, now that we know how to do it, it takes approximately 7 seconds. That includes the typing. But that's because we got a pre-existing implementation that we're just copying from. So yeah, OAuth bites the big one, whatever. We know this one. This I was not planning on putting in, but I was forced into putting this in by the other 2 who, by the way, at home I have a t-shirt that says strings not equal to binaries. I did not buy that t-shirt. Thank you. That would be way nicer, wouldn't it? The last three are specifically from Tom as a complete Erlang newbie. First thing, in his quote to me when I got on the phone with the two of them at 8:30 p.m., which is when I got online. Remember, 8 p.m. the contest closed. 8:30 I got online on the plane from Miami to New York. And I'm talking to them, and Tom says, and I quote, "So if is not if, is it?"
It depends.
It's a special case.
It's a very special case. I know, and my thing, and that's kind of my point, but I was like, what I wanted to say was, well, yeah, it's not if, but I couldn't because it's clearly if, and why, don't ask. James brought this up right at the beginning. It's worth going into again. Syntax is easy, semantics is not. Specifically, and this is a tricky bit, the issue with semantics is if you have no experience in any kind of coding whatsoever, then functional is the same as imperative, and who the hell cares, and you just go with it and you're done. If you have any kind of experience, you have an issue. Because you have to unlearn stuff. You've been brainwashed to think a certain way. For example, you think object-oriented programming means Java. Start with that. It doesn't, but, or you think, oh, it's JavaScript, it's easy. Node.js, right? It's written in JavaScript, it's easy to do. The whole reactor-based chaos that you have to deal with is a totally separate issue altogether. But the real problem with semantics is that people look at the semantics, they understand the syntax, and they go, I understand the semantics now. And that's where all hell breaks loose. And that's, in some ways, that's a good thing about Erlang, is because the syntax is just hard enough for you to basically get to the point where you're like, I'm not quite sure I know what I'm doing here. It kind of leaves that functional thing right in your face, and you have to get past it. And you know what? It's like the song says, immutable variables. Instant karma is going to get you, seriously. Tom had huge swaths of code, where he'd have some, okay, this actually was a discussion on Erlang questions recently, and Tom ran into this, and he just couldn't get past figuring out why, if there's a variable in a case statement and I'm matching it to something, why is it the same as a variable that's outside the case statement? I know the answer, you know the answer, but Tom doesn't know the answer. For people who are not used to the Erlang way of doing immutable variables, the lack of let, or the fact that once you bind a variable, it's bound for the life of that process, or whatever, it's hard for people to get. And to just kind of take a step back on this one and kind of look at this from the perspective of the noob, these three make complete sense to me. It's an if, it's there. Sorry. The syntax, especially for people who are looking at this from the world of Ruby or JavaScript, whatever, Node.js, syntax is an issue. And I know it's not easy, but sometimes it can be awfully hard to try and explain this to people who have not been brought up to think a certain way, or who have been brought up to think a certain way, depending on your perspective. So anyhow, that's kind of the what I did in my vacation moment. Yes. As it turns out, we're going back in 3 weeks. So.
For the next Spawnfest?
Yeah, right. No. The next Spawnfest may cause divorce. We're not too sure about that one. It depends. It really depends. Anything else?
When are they supposed to announce the winners for basically, we're having most of the judges done with the general scoring. Then they will have a call probably next week to discuss it, and we'll have numbers and the winners. So hopefully in a week or so. But here we're at the mercy of judges, so we can't really push it too hard.
And the prize is a vacation on Curacao, right?
I won first prize in that one for what it's worth. Seriously, it's we're going back. But okay, for those of you who are not divers, or those of you, have any of you been diving? Do you guys have you been down to Curacao or Bonaire? Oh, geez. In the Western Hemisphere, the two best places to go diving are Curacao and Bonaire. You grab a couple of tanks from the shore, they're $10 a pop. Just walk down to the shore, walk in, go down 30 feet, best diving in the world. Crystal clear, aquarium, you got pelagics, you got aquarium fishies, you got everything. It's just get there. Once you're there, best diving ever. God, I sound like a tourism board of Curacao shill, but it is that good. Cool, thank you.